Well, let's bring in Troy Bramston now, senior writer and columnist at The Australian, as we do every week. Troy, I'm really interested in your thoughts on this first week in office. What have you made of it for the Albanese team?
Yeah, Kieran, look, it's been a flying start. Of course, he had that early swearing in with the 5 ministers and then straight to the Quad. And he's announced today, after the first caucus meeting since the election, that he'll be heading to Indonesia as well. So he has certainly hit the ground running, and it's been a fast transition, the fastest ever in Australian history. I thought Anthony Albanese's speech to the caucus this morning was measured and sober. I thought he was obviously proud and emotional and euphoric, but he's very keen to sort of make sure this is going to be a process-driven, methodical, careful government. And I think that's what we'll see in the coming weeks and the coming months ahead. A government that really has learnt the lessons from their last time in office, and will have that emphasis on good cabinet process, good relationships with the caucus, and working across the political, business, and union divide.
And he put it quite starkly, just the difficulty that Labor's had in recent decades. 6 years out of 26 in the parliament for him, in government, in that government party room. And he said, I'm not going back down the other end of the hall. I want to stay here. And that seems he's very determined to make this a success. He said to me at the weekend, this has not been all about this election. He's been thinking about the next election already, Troy. Do you get that sense about his outlook as Prime Minister?
Yeah, that's right, Kieran. I mean, I watched that interview, of course, that you did with him, and he had said again that, he's looking to the next term, the next election. What he wants to do is stick to his very, very clear commitments that he made in the election campaign. There are a lot of them, but they weren't necessarily controversial. But nevertheless, it's a big agenda for him to deliver across, whether it's energy policy, whether it's economic policy, infrastructure, skills, the Uluru Statement from the heart, and of course a new type of foreign policy for Australia as well that's very engaged in the region. So he has things he wants to deliver, and he really wants to be able to go to the next election having given a commitment and delivered on those commitments. He doesn't want to step outside, be too adventurous, take to the next election policies that that they perhaps haven't promised in the last election campaign. He wants to be very, very focused on that. And even though Labor will have, it looks like, 77 seats and a clear majority in the parliament, I think he will also work very closely with that large crossbench, even though he's not going to need their support to get legislation passed. So it's a very, very different style of government, I think, to what we had under Kevin Rudd and indeed Julia Gillard.
What about the shift in tone, the message about wanting to change politics, about trying to be consensus-driven? This job summit that they're going to hold in the next couple of months, Jim Chalmers said that would be followed by a white paper and then policy. They're not going to just have a talk fest, he said. But this idea of consensus and moving beyond the divisive politics, is there an appetite for that, Troy?
Yeah, I think Anthony Albanese did strike a chord in the election campaign when he talked about ending conflict fatigue. And he very quickly pulled Tanya Plibersek into line for calling Peter Dutton Voldemort from the Harry Potter books and films. So he does want to set a new, different style of politics, a new, different tone. And of course, we've got a new Anthony Albanese. I mean, he was, of course, as we all know, a firebrand, hard left Labor warrior from decades ago. But he has matured. He has moderated. He did move the Labor Party to the centre. He is talking about working with the opposition, working with business. So it is a very different style, and I think he does want to turn that tone down in Australian politics, and I think that'll be welcome too. And I know that we've already seen a number of the crossbenchers saying they're welcoming the new approach that he's taking to the political discourse in this country, which I think is long overdue. And he's looking, as he said today, Kieran, to win more seats, to build that Labor majority at the next election. And you would know, and many of your viewers would know, that typically Labor governments come into power and then lose seats at subsequent elections. He wants to reverse that historical trend.
And to reverse a trend, Peter Dutton has a huge challenge ahead of him, because it's not just the 76, 77 likely seats that Labor has that sort of masks the real challenge ahead of the coalition before that next election, given the teal wave that we saw unfold.
That's right, Kieran. Look, I mean, the government may only have, a 2-seat majority or 3-seat majority, but the coalition are going to be perhaps, 16, 17 seats behind a majority of their own. So it's a long, long way back for the coalition back into power, and that will help Labor. And I think Anthony Albanese will be politically clever in appealing to those teal independents who took those heartland Liberal seats to help entrench them in power, entrench them in those seats so they're hard for the coalition to get back. So what Labor doesn't have in a big seat majority, they make up for it by the opposition being so far behind from there being a majority. And I think Peter Dutton has recognised that. And I've been impressed, actually, in the last few days about his recognising the need not to move the Liberal Party further to the right or indeed to the left, but moving it back towards the centre ground. And Susan Lee has said the same thing. And, I thought it was interesting that he said we're not a Conservative party, we're not a moderate party, we are a Liberal party. And so getting back to that ideal about what the Liberal Party was, what it stood for, I think is important, and his approach has been encouraging. But he will no doubt be a tough opponent, I think, for the Labor government, and he won't be making things easy for them at all.
No, he's a lot sharper and more strategic than many people give him credit for. And I don't think anyone, certainly Anthony Albanese, not taking him or underestimating his new opponent. Finally, let's look at the issue of the front bench. We know that the Treasurer, the Finance Minister, Defence Minister, Foreign Minister, we know all those key positions. Is there any other appointments that you're going to be looking out for particularly, Troy?
Yeah, Kieran. I mean, I've been speaking to Labor MPs this morning, and we know that Shane Newman has lost his front bench spot. We know that the new ministers or the new people on Labor's front bench will be Anne Ali, Christy McBain and Annika Wells. Of course, Terry Butler and Christina Keneally won't be there because they've lost their spots. We would expect that Don Farrell will become Labor's Senate Deputy Leader. And I've done some rough calculations, Kieran. I've worked out that if you count former ministers and parliamentary secretaries at the federal, state or territory level, we'd be looking at a Labor ministry with about 60% of them having front bench government experience in the 30-person Labor ministry. So that is quite significant. When the Whitlam government came to power in 1972, none of them had ever served as a minister before. And when the Hawke government came to power, there were only 3. And when the Rudd government came to power, there were only 2 former cabinet ministers. So we're going to see a very, very experienced Labor team that is going to be ready to step into those ministerial portfolios. And I know a number of MPs are nervously waiting the call this afternoon from Anthony Albanese to find out what ministry they'll get.